Thank you, Amos. Good morning, Amikam Norkin, General. Maybe more than everybody else here, the one who is really in the front of our conflict with Iran. I sat behind you during the former panel. I saw that you were moving here and there in some of the statement. I understand that it's because the questions that we're going to, I understand you're in uniform, but nevertheless, you know the title of the conference is What's the Strategy that Israel needs? But you heard from almost everybody, the question mark is, does Israel have a strategy at all? Can you formulate maybe the directive, the strategy of the Air Force in this struggle when we talk about Iran? Good morning, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity. It's a great honor for me. Many people sitting there who were my mentors throughout the years. As a commander of the Air Force, I don't ask what the strategy of Israel is, but how does the Air Force contribute to the strategy of Israel? And due to the activity for 70 years, the Air Force today has become more and more, and I mean the Air Force. That's a global trend. It's not just in Israel, but the aerial trend is more relevant and contributes more and more to the strategy of Israel. The strategy is required to rely on military force and deterrence, but the Air Force, apart from the deterrence, today managed to develop activities that are very significant, I think, with the intelligence and the area command, with the Israeli interests, without dragging Israel to war. You have to build force based on a certain directive. When you understand the big picture, what Israel wants to achieve, when you look at these two challenges of Iran, developing nuclear plan and regional impact, what is the directive? What kind of force do you have to build in order to realize this strategy? I'll get to that, but at the end of the day, a state that has the economic capability and the military power is a state that has an impact of a regional and global player. We see more and more countries who go back to this place. In the past, they were not there. It's not in vain that countries came here. After 73 years, the Royal Air Force came here the first time. What are the British looking for here? They want to be a player that has an impact in the global arena. Therefore, we are using our Air Force in attacking and defending in order to deter and to create aerial diplomacy. In one of the opportunities, I said that on one wing we have the weapons, and on the other wing we have the regional cooperation with air forces in the region and in the world. This collaboration, the air diplomacy, is a bridge to regional stability. And on that bridge, Israel can, together with its intelligence, so that the state of Israel will do things nationally. And the example that Amos spoke about, the connection with the AEA, I think there are many things that are still covered. We saw you last year, you took off your new diplomatic hat in the Emirates, but I want to understand, again, what about building force? The Chief of Staff spoke a few weeks ago about preparing the military option against Iran. What does it mean? The IDF determines target on a yearly basis, and the statement of the Chief of Staff for us changes our kind of modus operandi and puts Iran at the head. And that, of course, from that derives the training and the resources, and it's more in the focuses. in order to develop the skills, and that will be reflected in the work plan. So in the next 2 years, we're going to hear about longer flights, more than we did 10 years ago? I suppose yes. I suppose we will be required, maybe some of the acquisition plans are going to change. We have to get to a situation to have capabilities to fly longer distances. But there's no question that the military system that is estimating the situation and creates the objectives, that happens in the Chief of Staff's office. And the Chief of Staff tells us about the order of priorities. So people talked about former 2 deals with Iran. And of course, the situation today is different. I understand you cannot elaborate, of course. But is the Air Force capable of giving a real response to the Iranian threat? I'm not going to go into operational issues, but I think that there is one thing that I suppose everybody will agree upon, and that is that on the table there should be a military alternative. Whether we operate it or not, our responsibility is to prepare this alternative, and that's what we're going to see in the next few years. The Army is building the plan in the Chief of Staff office, coordinated with the government, and will see us and the various bodies in the IDF accordingly. When we see what until a few years ago was the end of times, doomsday, we now see you in the Emirates, and we have Navy Israeli ships in the Red Sea. So what's going to be? We'll see the Israeli Air Force landing in the Emirates and training there. You know, they ask me very often, do you train with other forces? What, they'll come to the next war and help us? No, that's not the goal. We have, of course, collaboration with the American Air Force, and the connection that we have today, in general, I allow myself today, with the military in the U.S. and also the Air Force in the U.S. is the best, the closest and deepest that I ever remember in all my years of office, on a daily basis, these connections. But in general, our connections, our training do not serve only the immediate military aid. The fact that Germany, the German Air Force, they acquire military equipment from the Israeli army industry. The fact that commanders come here and train with us, learn from us, we learn from them, that creates legitimacy in the world. These generals go back to their countries. And then when we do the campaign of Guardian of the Walls, they can explain us better, each of them in his own country. That really helps the Israeli security industry. The first thing they ask is, does the Israeli Air Force use these technologies? So these collaborations are very, very important. But the military industries, we saw guns going to Morocco. And are you in favor of these technologies? When I was in Dubai, there were commanders there from the entire region and the world. Nobody avoid shaking my hand. Even the Moroccan general, he came and even said a few words in Hebrew. So I think this is an opportunity. The same in the Gulf area, and I can tell you that in 10 days' time, I'm going to visit for the first time, I think ever, that an Israeli high officer visits Japan. I go to Japan for 48 hours. You ask, why Japan? What, they're going to come and help us? No. But I think that in our connection, we can, through this, create some of that strategy that Israel needs in developing connections, legitimacy, new areas to build force, and that's a great opportunity. And therefore, we have to do these things cleverly. It is in the Ministry of Defense. What do we sell? Who do we sell to? How do we do things? And as usual, there's more than one channel, but we have to play all the time in order that at the end of the day, short-term and long-term, to look at the challenges of the future to make the right selection to the strategy of Israel.
And we make so much progress with the new partners. As commander of the Air Force, which direction do you think this can go? First of all, our main advantage is our professional level. It's not just rapping. What we have, our advantage is our high level of proficiency. So we have to make sure that what we do the right way. I think that we will soon send observers to the Emirates. I see that I can picture the Emirates doing aerial exercises with us. We have a planned exercise in Greece. And the Emirates and the Israelis will fly together in this drill in Greece, and we are gradually laying the stones and paving the road towards a better future. Do you envision other neighbors joining the agreement? I hope that the neighbors that are less public will gradually come into the light. I think that these relations are important and they strengthen Israel's interests. The entire region is concerned by the different types of Iranian threats, the cruise missiles, the different attacks, and of course we're concerned by this as well. We have partners between here and the Persian Gulf. Will there be any type of shared system, defensive system that we develop with the countries with which we have agreements? I'm glad you asked me that question, and I would like to begin by saying that the cruise missiles and the attack drones, these are trends that will continue over the next few years. So we will see less tanks and combat soldiers attacking Israel's borders. We will see missiles and rockets and UAVs that attempt to infiltrate Israel's borders. We intercepted one on the eastern border and on the northern border and from the Gaza Strip as well, meaning that Hamas in the Gaza Strip also has capabilities to use UAVs with a good level of precision to attack us. We intercepted them with combat planes and others with the Iron Dome missiles. As the Prime Minister mentioned before, and as the Minister of Defense talked about at other opportunities, the White House also talks about regional defense. And my answer to you is that this is an excellent opportunity to develop relations and build a defensive program and plan for all of the countries that have a shared interest to protect themselves from the Iranian threat. We can contribute quite a bit to intelligence and detection and interception. Even though these UAVs are small and considered almost harmless, it's not true. It's difficult to detect them. It's difficult to down them. So we have to develop a combat theories and develop our skill so that we reach this level. So this is an excellent opportunity for Israel to become a major regional player in developing a regional defense plan that will enable us to help other countries and create strategic depth for Israel, which is so lacking here. Some say that you persistently down UAVs in Syria, on the grounds in Syria, and I want to ask you, what is Iran's capability to launch an attack of this kind, like the one that we saw in Aramco in 2019, a precise attack against a strategic target? Any defense player or goalie would say that it's always best to be on the defense side. So our defense our defensive activities have been prioritized, and we're trying to reach a state of zero infiltration into Israel. We're looking at that from the systemic perspective. I think that this is something that will threaten us over the next few years. The scenario that you talked about is one that I'm preparing for. We have to be prepared and not be surprised if it happens one day. Just in the last month, the 7 attacks were attributed to the Israeli Air Force. Are you measuring the accumulated effect of this campaign? It seems like you're attacking and acting, going on over and over again, but the Iranians are still there. I won't talk specifically about an attack or a specific week, but the campaign, but since 2013, we have not only been managing a strategy of ongoing security or of war. We want to create an impact during routine, and that was later called the campaign between the wars, and this changed our perspective. And since 2013, the Israeli Air Force has been working based on this strategic idea. I think that the strategic goals that the government has set for the army and that the army has been implementing over the last few years is undoubtedly having unprecedented achievements. This is not activity that we don't want it to lead to war, and therefore we keep one foot on the gas and one foot on the brakes to make sure that we are not moving too fast or taking measures that are not necessary. But we also can't be on zero, disrupting, preventing, reducing, and causing capabilities to and interfering with capabilities. We're talking about systems, UAVs, and missiles and rockets. These are things that we will not accept. We're not willing to tolerate on Israel's borders. And that is clearly having unprecedented and exceptional achievements. There's certain discomfort among the Syrians towards its Iranian guests. Do you see any change in the Syrian trends and the tendency to want to push Iran out? I don't think that's something that's going to happen anytime soon. I think we have to continue to work persistently and determinedly. It's going to be a long battle. We have to defend our interests. But when there is discourse on the on the political scale with the Russians, for example, we don't have any direct interest in causing harm to the Syrian regime, but rather only to the sponsorship that it gives to the Iranians. I think that over time the Syrian regime will also realize that Iranian presence is harmful for it. It will prefer to push them out of Syria. A lot of the efforts that you're investing in the campaign between the wars is to prevent Hezbollah from obtaining precision weapons. But this campaign is limited to Syria. Since 2019, Israel has avoided attacking inside Lebanon. The previous prime minister also talked about Hezbollah efforts to develop precision weapons inside Lebanon. Where do we stand with that situation right now? The issue of precision missiles is something that we've been dealing with for quite a few years, and the distribution of precision capabilities is expanding because all of the civilian technology is becoming precision-based. So we're surrounded by precision from all directions, and we have to develop our strategy for dealing with it. It's not only warheads, it's also the ability to collect intelligence, time management of advanced weapon systems. So we realize that since Israel is a small country with very few strategic sites, we will not be able to tolerate many attacks by precision weapons. So our goal is to prevent these strikes, and this is reflected not only in the kinetic perspective, it is also related to the intelligence perspective and defense. We are improving our defensive capabilities and also related to offensive issues. The Lebanese issue is something that the army is dealing with on a regular basis. So you're saying that you're constantly measuring the temperature and comparing the other side's capability and our capabilities in the defense and offense perspective, so that we know exactly where we stand when the temperature rises too high and action is needed. This is done as part of the assessment, the situation assessments done by the army, and we are still very far from the point where we will have to take action. In conclusion, I would like to ask you something that we talked about before, even though we didn't discuss this in advance. You published a book, a book was published about the function of the Air Force. I know many people didn't like the book that said that the Air Force hadn't cashed the deposit that it had left. When the state of Israel is facing a multi-arena scenario that is plausible, it is not unrealistic that we'll deal with multiple arenas, multiple fronts in the near future. Will the Air Force be able to cope with that? And that's a question that I think about every night before I fall asleep, and it keeps me up at night. It's something that I think all commanders of the Air Force were troubled by. We will do everything possible, of course, for I think the Air Force is always preparing itself for future challenges. And I want to say a final word. The wars that my generation and people who served in the IDF during different wars, they're very different from the ones that we experienced 50 years ago. They usually don't end with sticking a flag on a hill or signing different agreements, since these are sub-national organizations and their interests are different than national interests. The wars are based on shooting missiles and rockets. The question is, if they're shooting missiles on the last day of the war, does that mean that we lost? Shooting missiles at the state of Israel, our goal is to reduce them as much as possible, but stopping that is something that I don't think is something that should be defined as a target, reaching a point of zero rockets and missiles being shot at Israel. Our way of deciding, of resolving wars today are different than 50 years ago. And if you're interested in depth in the details of what the Air Force did during the Yom Kippur War, which is something that I learn new things about every month, and I want to refer you to a lecture given by David Ivri. You can find it on YouTube. Spend that hour and a half and listen to slightly different data. And I think that can teach quite a bit about what the Air Force did during the Yom Kippur War. We learned a lot from that war. And thanks to Benny Pellet, after the Yom Kippur War, he developed the Air Force strength correctly in the best way possible. We saw those benefits during the first Lebanon War, and we see those advantages today as well. The ability to maintain the aerial advantage, no matter which war we're fighting. This is a proven capability and it's a top priority. Unfortunately, our time is up, but I do want to take this rare opportunity to ask you one last question. This conference talks a lot about strategic challenges, and if you read, people who read this survey about the stance of Israeli society towards the IDF, people wonder if there's a crack in the confidence that the people of Israel have in the IDF. Can this become a strategic challenge to the IDF capabilities? Public confidence, the confidence of our families. I have 3 daughters. The youngest is doing her army service now. I think that is what supports us, what backs us as the Israeli army. I say the following. I, as a commander of the Air Force, 2/3 of our human resources are people aged 18 to 21. People don't believe that 2/3 of the Air Force soldiers are between age 18 and 21 doing their mandatory service. Those who man our simulators are 19-year-old girls. Those who are sitting in who are operating the Iron Dome are young adults, 18 and 19-year-olds. Our technicians, male and female, are all very young. So we attribute very, very much importance to the mandatory soldiers. And we realize that everyone in the region uses similar equipment. What was true over the last 70 years, the human capital, the ability of the idea of soldiers to bring that added benefit that guarantees our victory has not changed. So we have to keep the best people in the army in service. We have to give them a sense of meaning, of significance, of empathy. It's not just on a few hundred shekels. It's a matter of sensitivity, the ability to look into their eyes, to improve the terms of service. And it's something that the commanders in the Air Force are very aware of. They put a lot of effort into that. I think that we have the Iranian threat on one side and Israeli society on the other. And I think that both are very, very much within the awareness of the IDF commanders. Thank you very much.